Well, in my old historic neighborhood, I am known as the tulip lady because every spring I have hundreds and hundreds of tulips in bloom, in moss, in my front yard. I have often said that I think I could live without food and water in the spring more easily than I could go without my tulip bulbs. So when flowerbulbs.com asked me to do kind of a tutorial on how I plant large quantities of flower bulbs at one time, I was happy to demonstrate for you how I do it in relatively short order, much easier than you might think. I usually get all of my bulbs very early. That makes sure that I get exactly what I want. They haven't sold out of the colors and the staggered bloom times that I really covet for my spring show. So how do I decide what I want to order? Well, I kind of take into consideration the style of my garden and the color of my home. And then, as I said, I like staggered bloom. In other words, some will bloom early, some will bloom late in a variety of different colors. That way I have this continuous dramatic spring show over the course of the spring. So I thought I would give you some of my best tips for how I plant large quantities of bulbs. How and when and why, and then how I take care of them over the course of the winter to ensure that I have a really good spring show. So obviously I have a lot of bulbs and they are of different varieties. So what I do to mix them easily is I just dump all of them into a wheelbarrow and then I just kind of mix them up. I don't really care that they are exactly equally mixed, but nevertheless, I want a nice representation of each of the blends throughout the garden. Now, as I said, I order all of my bulbs early as July or August. If I'm getting them from a nursery, I will also buy them as soon as I see them to make sure I get what I want. And then I just store them in a cool, dark place until I'm ready to plant, which for me, in my zone 7 is around Thanksgiving. So I'm planting these just before Thanksgiving, but I could plant them all the way up through almost the end of December. Just check with the bulb company as to when you need to plant in your zone. Now, the tip to planting large quantities of bulbs is to dig great big holes and plant all sorts of bulbs at one time. None of this individual bulbs in tiny little holes with a bulb tool. I have an informal garden, so what I do is I just dig large holes, most of them kind of in a kidney shape, that surround different plants in my landscape. And then when I get the hole to the depth it needs to be, which is about 6 inches, about 2.5 times the depth of the bulb, then I just dig it to that depth. I use a tarp and I just throw the soil onto a tarp or a piece of cardboard. Then when I get all of them in place, all I have to do is then just dump that tarp with the soil back onto, or back into rather, into the hole. Now, if you're planning on or trying to determine how many you want to plant, I would say probably about 5 bulbs per square foot. But in some cases, especially when I'm planting in containers, I will plant them almost cheek to jowl or shoulder to shoulder. So I will put a large number of bulbs in a relatively small space. Now you can see how quickly this goes. I've got them, maybe a couple of inches apart. And what I like about these kidney-shaped holes is that what I'm going to do is create an effect of a drift that kind of moves throughout my front landscape. Now when you do it this way, digging large holes, you can see how quickly it goes and how many you can get in the ground at one time. Sometimes I'll even dig the holes one day and the next day come out and plant the bulbs. It's as easy as that. Now you'll notice that I'm not using any bulb food. The wonderful thing about any kind of bulb is that it's got all of the food it needs right in that neat little package. So in the past, I used to supplement it with some bulb food, but I don't do that anymore because I found it was just an unnecessary both expense and step. And I'm just planting them with the pointy end up. See how quickly that goes? After I get this hole completely filled, I'll just move on to my next hole. And that is how you can plant a large number of bulbs in a very short, or relatively short, amount of time. When the weather is nice, on a warm Indian summer day, after the temperature of the soil though has cooled, I like at least 2 good solid weeks of sweater weather, you are ready to plant. Preferably not on a day like today where I've got 25-mile-an-hour winds. But nevertheless, it makes for a pleasant way to spend an afternoon. Well, and that's pretty much it. It took me, I would say, about 30 minutes to plant 100 bulbs. I've got another few hundred to go, so I've got a good solid afternoon ahead of me. But all I'm doing now is just watering them in and waiting. That's about the only thing that's required between now and the magic that begins in the spring. If it's an exceptionally dry winter, I might come out here and give it some supplemental water. But other than that, I'm not going to have to do anything. You know, I get asked over and over again, is it worth it to plant this many bulbs every fall? And let me tell you, from the pleasure it gives me and from the hundreds of people who drive by each spring, I promise you, planting large quantities of bulbs in the fall for a spring show is well worth the effort. You might want to give it a try.